It was such it was such a pleasure. I got a recording in progress. Because we had the chance to tour her gardens and to hear her knowledge of the plants. And what really also grabbed me was just her passion for native New England medicinal plants. Herbs and health have always been a part of Hannah's life. And she began her herbalist path at a young age under the watchful instruction of her godmother. That's wonderful. And her godmother was also a registered herbalist. She continued her studies and grew her knowledge in a variety of areas of herbal education. She's a practicing herbalist, and her basic principle is that using herbs should be simple and easily incorporated into our lives. It is a privilege, Hannah, that you join us tonight to share how plants have been used in traditional medicine for generations to support health and wellness, and how we too can begin the journey of growing our own botanical garden. Welcome.
Thank you very much. That was so nice. I hadn't realized, I figured the bio would get edited. So it was quite a lot of information there for all of you. So I'm Hannah. As Carol mentioned, I'm a practicing herbalist. So that means I see clients. May I share my screen? May I begin that? Let's see here. Bear with me. I'm a little out of practice. I'm going to share my screen and let's do this one. Open, and let's do the full slideshow.
Nice.
Okay, there we go. Hello. All right, can y'all see that okay?
Beautiful.
Yep. All right, so this is me. This is my business. I am a very small business owner. It's kind of just me. I teach classes like we're doing now. Medicinal plants and restoring habitats is a big passion project of mine, has been for pretty much as long as I can remember. I have a small line of herbal teas and body care. I do wellness consultations, so I see clients. I do some practice with aromatherapy, and I also am a member of the United Plant Savers, a botanical sanctuary network. And a botanical sanctuary is essentially that. It's a place where plants, particularly those that are native and at risk, have a place to grow free and thrive. And so I can teach you all about what I'm growing. So my website is hannahsherbals.com. If you want to email me questions, it's always the best way to reach me. It's hannahsherbals@gmail.com. And with that, let's talk about New England medicinal plants and growing them for biodiversity and habitat restoration and perhaps some wellness. So listen, I have to put this in there, safety first. All the information is not intended to treat, diagnose, prevent, cure any diseases. And just because it's natural doesn't mean it's safe. So, do your research, contact a qualified herbalist before you start trying herbs. But this is going to be geared more towards the gardening aspect and some of the historical aspect of herbs. And with that, I'd like to offer respect and gratitude because the information that I have learned and that I'm sharing with you really is only available because of the Native Americans that inhabited this land before Europeans got here. So thank you very much for all of that wisdom they've imparted. And then let's talk about what is a native plant. There's a little bit of, sort of background stuff worldwide. So this is a plant that's a part of the balance of nature, right? It's become a part of their ecosystem over hundreds or thousands of years. Specific to the United States, those would only be plants that are found in this country prior to European settlement. So why grow native medicinal plants? So there are tons of reasons, a couple of them, habitat restoration. So many of these plants, and I actually read this book quite a while ago. I'll sidetrack here, sorry, 5 minutes in and sidetracking, called Bark Skins by Annie Proulx, I believe is how you pronounce her last name. And it's historical fiction, but her descriptions of these old growth forests in New England and how the forest floors were just blanketed in stands of these native medicinal plants, and looking around and picturing that in my mind and then seeing how few are in our landscapes right now, that for me is really my primary impetus for growing native medicinals for habitat restoration. With that comes ecological sustainability. You encourage wildlife, pollinators, animals. Some people might be interested in just visual interest. You are very rarely going to have many people come over to your garden when you have native medicinals who probably have that in their garden. So you've got a lot of interest there. And then maybe you'd like to try growing some of your own medicine. I'm going to talk about, I think it's 5 plants that I have grown really successfully here in West Newbury. And I'm going to focus on these ones because they're so useful, and they're generally safe. Again, safety first, always do your research. Those of you who are interested in your retirement accounts, or you have 10 years to invest in some land restoration and growing some medicinal plants, you might actually be interested in doing this for profit. A lot of these plants have really, really high market value. Golden seal, for example, black cohosh, Panax ginseng, the American ginseng. I have not grown it successfully, so I'm not sharing in this class, but if you can grow it, please share with me because I'd love that. And then maybe you're just interested in educating yourself or challenging your gardening know-how, or maybe you'd like to start your own process of creating a botanical sanctuary. So there are lots and lots of reasons, and this is just sort of some of the highlights. So bear with me here. I just got to change my view because I keep getting distracted. There we go. It's like that, ooh, shiny. All right, that's a little better. Pardon me. Okay, so before you get started with growing native medicinals, you need to plan to grow. This is sort of common with any type of garden. You need to think about your location, the slope, the sun exposure, animals. Do you have browsing animals like deer? Do you have neighbors with dogs or cats? Are you like me and you have chickens that roam free and like to dig up everything they can? Also think about your neighbors. My wildflower gardens may seem beautiful to me, but my neighbors might think it's a terrible eyesore. And it might be nice to consider the neighbors before you're putting in a whole bunch of plants. At the same time, I generally prefer plants to people, so I don't know if I'm a great one for that. And then also think about seed dispersal. This is something that a lot of people don't always think about with location. Are you planting something that spreads with wind-blown seeds, and the next thing you know, you're going to have this plant everywhere? Or is it a plant that readily seeds itself, and you might run the risk of not being able to maintain that plant's population? As you can see here, these 2 pictures are of my leaching field. When we came to our property here, I looked at the leaching field, which at the time it looked like a barren wasteland. And I looked at my husband and I said, I can't have a dirt hill in my backyard. And he said, plant wildflowers on it. And I went, oh, okay, that's good. So this is my leaching field. In the spring, it's going to be covered in violets. So in a couple of weeks, that's what it's going to look like. And then in midsummer, this was actually a couple of years ago. This was like a 3rd year growth of black-eyed Susans, and they got really out of control. I'm not sure what's going to come up this year. It's sort of my ever-changing canvas. So we'll see what happens this year. But, think about where you're growing things. And what's the purpose? Are you looking for habitat restoration, biodiversity? Do you want to grow in your own medicine? And then think about the plants. Are you more interested in annuals, perennials, a combination? What's the seasonality of these plants? Are you looking for things that are going to bloom in the spring, the summer? Are they going to be able to overwinter in New England? And then also think about, hardiness, right? Is this a plant that actually, while it's native, is it a plant that's going to thrive here? I'm a big fan of, get one and try it out. If it does well, great. If it doesn't do well and comes up the next year, move it somewhere else. Plants generally are pretty forgiving. And then also think about time. How much time do you have? A lot of these native medicinals are really slow growing plants. Some like the golden seal can take, 5 to 7 years before it reaches full maturity. A ginseng, a Panax ginseng, can take up to 10 years before it reaches full maturity. So, think about that. How much time do you have to invest in letting your garden grow? And then think about, plan for the future too, right? Gardens evolve, keep trying, have short and long-term goals, and don't get discouraged. I keep trying to have a Better Homes and Gardens garden, and I finally accepted it's just going to be wild. And now I've made peace with it. All right, let's see. So I'm going to go over, so United Plant Savers is a group that I'm a member of, have been since their inception. Their goal is very much like West Newbury Wild Native. It's to protect native medicinal plants and fungi and their habitats. So there's some terminology on some of these slides. Just going to go through real quickly. An endangered species, something that's likely to become extinct in the near future. A threatened species is vulnerable to endangerment or extinction in the near future. Extirpated, that's a fun Scrabble word. So this is also referred to as local extinction. So this is a loss of a species from a portion of its range, either from, say, habitat loss, encroachment, pesticides, whatever it may be. There will still be another population of this plant elsewhere, but otherwise it's essentially extinct in that region. Exploitably vulnerable. This is something that I think is kind of important for us to think about in that sort of forward thinking mode, is that this is species that are likely to become threatened in the near future if causal factors continue unchecked. So this is big in New York. I've seen a lot of this. Like, in a perfect example of this would be ramps. They are all the food rage. They're delicious, but what's happening is you have people going out and wild harvesting these things, and what they're doing is they're pulling up the whole bulb. It takes like 7 years before one ramp will reach maturity. So if you have hundreds of these, get thousands getting pulled out every year, think about what that's going to do to the population long term. And then special concern plants, these aren't endangered, they're not threatened, but they could be considered vulnerable for a wide variety of reasons. So, and here at the bottom, my footnote, purchase organically grown rather than wild harvested plants and herbs. So wild harvested just means someone went out into the woods or wherever they went out into nature and they dug that plant up and took it home with them or sold it to you. So bad practice to do that. All right, we're going to start with a pretty common plant. I'm trying to go from easiest to more difficult in growing, also hoping that a lot of you already have this beauty in your garden. This is Echinacea. This particular species is Echinacea purpurea. There are actually 9 species of Echinacea. They're all native to the US and Canada, parts of Canada. Most of the Echinacea plants are prairie plants or sort of in the Rockies, but you will find Echinacea purpurea has a pretty wide range. It's a perennial plant. So far, I have several that are at least 6-7 years old. So it's got mine, at any rate, have a pretty long growth rate. It's got summer blooms. They grow to, depending on where, they can grow between like 3 to 5 feet. 5 would be on the high end. I'd see 3 to 4 generally. They prefer full sun. It's a prairie plant. So this is something that can handle some heat. It can handle a little bit of drought, but it does prefer a loamy soil. Would normally be growing up among grasses. Moderate water, but it can, like I said, it can tolerate some drought. I top dress mine in the fall with compost, and if you want to start it from seed, you can cold stratify them. So you can, if anybody has a question about cold stratifying, I can answer that later, but essentially it's just treating your seeds to a period of cold. Like plant them in the fall and then they'll come up in the spring. I have had really good luck with these creating new babies for me. In fact, so many that I often don't know what to do with them. So this is a wonderful plant in the garden. It's really ornamental. All parts of this plant can be used for medicine. Roots, seeds, flowers, leaves. It's really, really a great one to have in your herbal medicine chest. And this one benefits. So this is a great one for pollinators, seed-eating birds. So in the autumn and the winter, I leave all my seed heads up, and the goldfinches just love love my Echinacea seed heads. The chickens will get at them too if they can jump high enough. It's pretty amusing to watch. And they're a great flower for bouquets as well, if that's something that interests you. I'm going to talk about some herbal actions, and I don't expect you to know all of these terms. I'll explain some of the less common ones, but this is in the herbal world. This is how herbs act within the body, what they do within your system. So Echinacea is an alterative. This formerly used to be known as, we're called blood cleansers. We have learned they don't actually cleanse the blood, but they help work with the processes of elimination, particularly the liver and the kidneys, which again are working with the blood. So sorry, a little more info than you needed, but Echinacea, it's also an antimicrobial, a lymphatic. So this is a great one for at the end of a cold or a flu, when you're starting to feel that stagnation. Echinacea can come in there and help move everything along and get you back to wellness. It's also an antiviral, an antiseptic, an anti-inflammatory, a diaphoretic. So here's another good Scrabble word. A diaphoretic is something that helps increase vasodilation. It helps increase blood flow to the surface of the skin and encourages perspiration. So historically, a diaphoretic would be used when someone has a fever and you needed to help them break that fever. It's also what's called a vulnerary, which is a wound healing herb. So, okay, great. We've got all these actions. Now, what do we do with them? So for wellness, this plant has been used historically countless number of times for infections, whether they be internal or external. Insect bites, snake bites, they would put a poultice of this. A poultice is when you mash up the herb material and make a paste, and you put it topically onto an injury, a bite, a wound. It's still a wonderful method of medicine, particularly if you're out, say, in the woods, or you're out on a hike somewhere and you need some plant medicine. You can just crush it up and put it right on your skin. Also, this was used for toothaches. So let's think about, back prior to our wonderful modern oral hygiene, you had a toothache, you didn't necessarily have a dentist you could get to. So you could chew on some of the Echinacea seeds or the root. It has a bit of a numbing effect, so it would help alleviate the pain, but it's also going to be dealing with some of the microbes and if there's any sort of infection in there. I don't know how many teeth it saved, but let's hope some. And then I wanted to share with you too, so some of the benefits of pollinators. So this is one of my favorite photos. I love this little tree frog, and you can see that little tiny little fly right in the back. Let's see, I don't know if you can see my cursor. Can you see that right there? So that's a lovely little picture. My little friends, I love the tree frogs. And then of course this I just took 2 days ago. So these are my little Echinacea buds coming up from the ground. They're probably not even an inch tall, but you can see the stalks, the brown stalks on the outside. I finally cut those down in the spring. And those, so based on that, I'm going to say that plant is probably like 3, maybe 4 years old, and should at this age should probably have a good like 5 to 6 big flower spikes. And if you cut those in summer, they will rebloom, though not with the same hardiness as in the beginning of the year. So our next plant, this is another one. I will admit I don't use this as often for medicine because I find that a lot of my plants end up going right to the little wild creatures. So this is in the herbal world, we call this Pleurisy root. You may know it as butterfly weed. Its species name is Asclepias tuberosa. It is in the milkweed family. This one, again, is more of a prairie plant. You will find it growing alongside Echinacea. They grow really nicely together, and the colors together look really nice in a garden. It's a perennial. This one does have a deep taproot, and it has summer blooms. It likes full sun. It can handle some drought, and I say some, but I'd like to say it can handle quite a bit of drought. It is a really hardy plant. I have plants that I have dug up, not well, mind you, because I didn't know. I was digging where the Pleurisy root was, and I thought for sure I had killed my Pleurisy root, and wouldn't you know it, it came back. It is incredibly hardy. It does prefer some sandy soil. It likes drainage. And again, I top dress with fertilizer. It probably says that on most of these slides because I usually do a top dressing in the fall. And you would want to cold stratify the seed for this as well, or plant it in place. It doesn't like to be transplanted. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll cold stratify by putting into little, 3 or 4 inch pots and then just leaving them out on my deck all winter. So that way when they do bloom, rather than having to try and find them in my garden among the garlic and onions and who knows what else, I've already got them in a pot and ready to go wherever I want them. So this one, I will say too, you're not going to get flowers the first year. It generally will flower in the second or third year. And you can see here, I apologize, the photos are a little blurry. I was telling Nancy and Carol earlier, I had a little issue with my computer and some coffee a couple of years ago, and I'm still trying to recover everything. So some of these photos are a little blurry, but you'll get the idea. So this is Pleurisy root. This is probably around June, I want to say. And you can see how it comes up from the ground. This plant, based on how many stalks are, I think this is my old favorite. This one was probably like 5 years old at this point. And they get rather, it's considered an herbaceous perennial, but it has more of a small shrub habitat. So I have a couple that are more mature now, past that 3-year mark. They get to be, about 2 feet tall and not bushy per se, but they definitely fill out an area. So I would say plant your Pleurisy root where you want to keep it. But like I said, I don't use this often for medicine because I don't know if you can all see on your screens that little cutie there. The butterfly weed, the Pleurisy root, all of the milkweeds, this is a a food source for butterflies, for monarch butterflies. I'm getting distracted by the picture and thinking about all the butterflies in my garden coming this summer. So this is where they'll lay their eggs on this plant. The caterpillars will eat it. It's a food and nectar source for the butterflies and for other pollinators. So most of my butterfly weed actually goes to just feed the monarchs, and I don't harvest much of it at all. But in the parts that you would use would be the roots. So you'd need to dig it up. And then some of the actions, it's bitter. So things that are bitter are going to act on the digestive system. It's an anti-inflammatory, an antispasmodic, an expectorant. So an expectorant is something that helps you expel mucus. So if you have congestion in your lungs, expectorants help clear that congestion. It's also got antiviral properties and antimicrobial properties. And in large doses, it can be an emetic. So this historically, and even still, was used for chest infections, particularly pleurisy, hence the name, where you get an infection between the lungs and the pleural lining. So you could use it for chest infections of all kinds, bronchial congestion, so asthma, pleurisy, bronchitis, tuberculosis, any lung infection, Pleurisy root was going to be up front and center, cough and indigestion. And then the other thing too, when you have those bitters, you're helping the processes of elimination. So you've got this herb that's helping to It's an antispasmodic, so it's helping your lungs to not be in such spasm while you're dealing with a lung infection. It's an expectorant to help you clear out that infection and that congestion. And then you also have this bitter element that's helping your body to process through and clear out any toxins. We call them toxins. So this is one that I find, when I was looking at the UPS status, I'm not going to mention too much about them as I go through the slides, but I found it was interesting that this one was possibly extirpated in Maine. It's endangered in New Hampshire, exploitably vulnerable in New York, of special concern in Rhode Island, and threatened in Vermont. And I was just surprised at how close to home these things were hitting with this particular plant, because it's so beautiful. It's such a, from a garden standpoint alone, it's a stunning plant. But then when you take into consideration all of its other benefits, it's like, why wouldn't you grow it? All right. Then moving on, we're going to go into, so those are two full sun plants. I'm trying to keep an eye on the time. So this is one where we can go into sun or shade, and I'm hoping some of you have this growing in your garden. This is black cohosh. Some people call it bugbane. Other people know of it as, is it fairy lanterns or fairy wands? I'm going to go with fairy wands because that's what they look like to me. The species name is Echinacea racemosa. They've recently changed that botanical name. previously was Simicifuga racemosa. So you might see that in different books depending on the date of the book that you're looking at. It is a perennial. It has summer blooms, and this one can get, this particular plant here, I think was probably like 5 feet tall. I've had a couple that were in a little bit sunnier location and they're getting well over that 5 feet tall mark. And as they get older, they'll get a little bit taller in that 5 to 6 foot range, and they'll be really quite striking. Right now, I just have a few. I'm working on growing a really nice border edge of them. It does really well in full shade, but it can do nicely with sun too. As long as you keep track of it, it's going to need a little bit more water to the roots when it's in sun. Because it is a native woodland plant, it does like a nice heavy top dressing of leaf mulch, which is great in the autumn if, like me, you have a husband who doesn't want leaves all over his lawn and doesn't want to rake them all over the lawn. So I just say, honey, put them right in my gardens. And he always thinks I'm crazy. And I said, no, they need it. They need, a good 6 inches, 4 to 6 inches of leaf mulch every year. So it's a great way to use up those leaves that fall in your yard. This one is great for pollinators, butterflies, bees. They're little flies that like to buzz around it. The parts of, let me see here, I have a close-up of the flowers. You can see the flowers. I don't know what that little insect is in the upper left. I'm turning into a novice entomologist now with all these plants. I've got so many bugs coming, but I don't know what this one is. So this is a close-up of the flowers, so you can just see how spectacular they are. They're really radiant. The part of this plant, let me see here, I'm going to show you too. This is what, again, sorry, but it's a little blurry, but this is what happens in the springtime. They unfurl like this, and you see that beautiful dark reddish purple color. They're just really, really striking in the springtime, and they unfurl, and it amazes me that this little itty bitty tiny thing turns into this spectacular plant. So you would use the root. This is one it can be dug up with relative ease, but it is, a slower grower. Probably takes about 3 years before you're really going to start getting good blooms on it. It's an analgesic, so pain relieving, antispasmodic. I've got a lot of information about this plant because I really, really like it. It's a nervine. So nervines help us deal with stress. They help support the nervous system. Anti-inflammatory. It's hormone balancing. It can be used by men, but it's generally used more for women for hormone balancing. It's also got some antimicrobial effects. And here's another fun word, galactagogue. So this is something that encourages milk production. So this is really useful for women who have given birth and maybe need a little extra help getting the milk to come in, or they need a little extra milk flow for their baby. It's also a bronchodilator, so it helps open the lungs, and antitussive. So antitussive, this means it helps stop coughing. So how was this used historically? Nerve and muscle pain. This is a top-notch herb for nerve and muscle pain. Let me say also, though, that because this is a plant that is endangered, see that? Endangered in Massachusetts, you want to purchase organically grown plants, and if you do decide to try using this herb, do source cultivated herbs rather than wild harvested. At this point, I think it's like 97% of the dried herb that you would get from your herb shop or ordering online comes from the wild. So there's a really, really heavy demand on this plant in its wild populations, and it's so beautiful. I'd really like to encourage you all to grow it. I'm going to just go back to that so you can see these beautiful fairy wands. So nerve and muscle pain, this is spectacular for everything from sciatica to muscle sprains and injuries, backaches. This was one of the only plants that got me walking when I was dealing with some major sciatica about a dozen years ago. Also good for menopause and menstrual irregularities, so changes of life or hormone balancing. It was used by Native Americans for helping to prepare for childbirth. So about the last week to 2 weeks of while you're pregnant, you would begin to use this herb to help prepare the uterus for delivering the baby. This is really a very female-centric plant, but for, all of us who have nerve and muscle pain, it's really, really fantastic too. And then also they would use this for mastitis, and then cough and congestion. So again, this is endangered in Massachusetts, so I would really encourage you all to grow it. And if you want to grow it and be in touch with me about buying your locally grown black cohosh, please do contact me, because I'm always looking for good sources. All right, flip back through these slides. Going into more shades, Solomon Seal. I am sure several of you have this growing in your gardens, because I've seen it at a lot of the garden club, the West Newbury Garden Club sales, and it always makes me happy to see it. The medicinal species that I have grown up using is Polygonatum biflorum. You can see in this picture, this is actually Polygonatum. This should be multiflorum. So biflorum indicates that it has two of these bell-shaped flowers. Multiflorum, it has multiple flowers. I didn't have a good picture of the biflorum, and this one was prettier. But you can use them interchangeably. It is a perennial, blooms mid to late spring, and it loves shade, but it also loves forest edges, so where it can get some dappled sun, part sun. It likes loam, well-draining soil, so treat it with a little more delicately than your sort of deeper woodland plants. But also remember that this one it's going to grow on a rhizome, so it's going to create a really nice thick mat of roots, and do your best not to disturb that mat of roots if you don't have to. So I would say plant this in place where you want to keep it, and if you have intention of digging it up to use it for medicine, then just be aware that you're going to have to disturb that root system. It will recover. I promise it will recover. And this one, you need to, for the seeds to germinate, and these seeds can take a year or two to germinate, so be patient. But you need to cold stratify the seed, and the seed needs to be fresh, not dried. So I generally will just take the berries and I will plant them in place around existing plants or in new areas, and just sort of let them be and see what comes up. It's really a practice in patience, which I personally kind of enjoy. This one is great. Bumblebees love, love, love Solomon Seal. Pollinators love it. Deer also love this plant. So see these little babies here? It's not a great photo. It's a little dark, but these little tiny shoots, I don't know if you can see my screen here, my cursor. These little tiny shoots, when they come up in the spring, deer love them. I fortunately haven't had an issue with deer yet, knock on wood, but they like to munch on these little shoots. So be aware that if you have deer, you might need to protect your Solomon Seal. And if you can see in the bottom left of this photo, this is Solomon Seal. It grows on a rhizome. This was actually, the funny thing is, the places where I've seen Solomon Seal growing in the wild the most around here are in cracks of rocks where dirt and moss has collected. And I'm not entirely sure why it's choosing that location, but this is one of those growing on a rock. So it never got very big because it doesn't have a lot of dirt. But if you can see here on the bottom left, this is the rhizome here, and there are these little round scars along the rhizome. Those are each year's growth. So based on this, it looks like this plant here was at least 3-4 years old, and that's how it will continue to grow. And it actually prefers congestion. It really likes to be in a tight group. So feel free to plant as many Solomon Seal as you want, and they will crowd themselves out, and they will be happy, happy, happy. So this is a little bit better picture of what is to come in a few weeks. Love watching these plants unfurl. So the actions, a nutritive tonic. So these are some of my favorite herbs, nutritive tonics. So tonics are typically going to be herbs that are safe for just about everyone to use on a daily basis long term. Painting broad strokes here, there are always caveats. We each have our own individual bodies and health concerns. So, again, safety first. But nutritive tonics are generally things that are going to help rebuild our system. They're like, in herb world, they're like the superfoods. They're kind of like the kales of of the herb world, if, for lack of a better analogy. It's also a demulcent. So when you put a demulcent on your skin, it's called an emollient. When you take it internally, it's called a demulcent. So essentially that just means it's soothing. It adds an element of moisture, of sort of slipperiness. It helps to coat and soothe tissues. It's also an anti-inflammatory and a reproductive tonic. Native Americans ate this root regularly. And I would like to say that I've only got a couple of things in here for wellness because I use it for a couple of specific things. Most of these herbs where I'm putting the actions in, this is just a very small handful of what these herbs do, but it could take an hour just to go over all of the herbal actions for one or two plants. So I tried to fine tune it for you. You know, because plants they're full of phytochemicals, full of phytonutrients. So they're going to do more than one thing. And that's what I love about it. You know, if medicine, our food should be our medicine. Well, in my world, herbs are food. So I am eating my medicine. I'd also like to say medicine shouldn't taste good. A lot of these herbs do not taste good, but I don't know. I don't think medicine should taste good. We should try and stay as healthy as we can so we don't have to take the bad tasting stuff. So back to topic. Solomon seal is one of the premier herbs for arthritis, joint inflammation, nerve, any sort of area where you've got friction in your joints, irritation, inflammation. Solomon seal is spot on, and you can take this internally. You can use it topically. One of my favorite ways for using herbs is, particularly when I'm doing it for musculoskeletal thing, is to actually do a foot bath where you take a couple handfuls of your herbs and put it in a tub, cover it with hot water, and then you just soak your feet for about 15 to 20 minutes. So that's some of my favorite ways to use herbs for musculoskeletal. This was not on the United Plant Savers risk for at risk list, which made me happy, but this is a plant that is in really high demand, and it's so incredibly useful that if you start growing it, you will be making many, many herbalists happy. Okay, going on to more. Now, this is one you might not have in your gardens, though I would really encourage you to do so. It has been growing wonderfully. Maybe not everyone, but I'd say 90% of the golden seal plants that I have put in the ground have come up. They're doing really well. They love living in the woods. They're so happy here. This species is called golden seal. The root is incredibly yellow. It has a chemical constituent called berberine, which gives it that yellow color. So the species name of this is Hydrastis canadensis. The growth, a perennial. Again, this is a slow to mature plant. This one can take 5 to 7 years before it's ready to be harvested for medicine. You're probably looking at 2 to 3 years before you're going to get a bloom on this plant. So be patient. You know, again, the germination can take 1 to 2 years. So just be patient. I do find that the easiest way, if you to grow this plant, is actually through root division, because it will come up, it will grow little rootlets. And I do at the end of the slideshow have a list of some resources where I get plants and seeds and places where I look for information. So I'll have all that listed for you. This one's great for spring pollinators. It's one of the ephemerals. So those early first bees that are out, they love to have the golden seal on hand. The birds also will use this because they eat the seeds, which they actually eat the berries, which then helps disperse the seeds. Let me see here. So these are from my garden. These are like 3-year-old plants, and you can see they're not very big. They get to be about 1 foot tall. They're not, a particularly showy plant, which I kind of like because it sort of blends in with the natural ecosystem really nicely. It's not showing off. It's just saying, hey, I'm here. I'm doing my thing. You use the rhizome. So like Solomon seal, this one does like to be crowded. It will create a nice root system, a nice mat of roots. And this is a plant that is incredibly, incredibly useful. It is also a plant that is a little on the stronger side of life, kind of like the black cohosh. It's one that, a little can go a long way. So it's a bitter tonic. So bitters, they help our digestion. It's also a mucous membrane tonic. There has, for a long time, golden seal, I when was it, back in the 90s, there's a big run on golden seal because it was being touted as the immune system herb, and every supplement was echinacea and golden seal, get rid of your cold. So this was, they were also, there were a number of other things they were saying golden seal was good for. So us little natural health people were trying to dispel these myths. Golden seal, to be effective for mucous membrane irritation, needs to come into contact physically with those mucous membranes. So for example, it's great for as an eye wash. It's great as a throat gargle. Back when people would use it for sinus infections, they would actually snort the powder. I personally have never done this. I don't plan on ever doing it, but if I were in a really desperate situation, I would probably try it. It would probably work really well. Until then, I'll just continue with my facial steams because they're a lot less invasive. So it's also an astringent. So astringents tighten and tone tissues. So think about it. If you have mucous membrane irritation, you've also got inflammation. If you have an astringent, it's tightening and toning those tissues and bringing them back into a state of better health. It has some antimicrobial properties, antiseptic properties. It can have a laxative effect if you're taking too much of it. It's also a hepatic. Hepatics are herbs that are specific to the liver. So this was one that historically, and even still, was used for liver disorders, right? And so think about way back before we had all of this modern medicine, if you had a liver disorder, if you had jaundice, what were you going to do? You were going to go and get some golden seal. If you're interested, a little side note, there's some really interesting history on patent medicines. So a lot of these plants that I'm talking about at one time or another may have been a part of the US pharmacopoeia. Also, a lot of these herbs become the basis of a lot of the medications we take now. So you can, do some history research on that. There's a lot of fun information to find. So liver disorders, gastrointestinal inflammation. This is a really, really broad category, gastrointestinal inflammation. So you can look at it from everything from like ulcers to diverticulitis, a whole range of things. People have used it for candida, though, again, I really find you need to have the herb come into contact with it. So I don't know if it's as effective for digestive candida, but again, I'm getting sidetracked here. But it's really, really great for acute infections, both internal and external. You can put it on, if you have a wound, you have an injury, think about, way back when they would have a tin of the golden seal powder. So if they got an injury or a wound, they could just pack it into that injury and help prevent infection, help tightening and toning those tissues, and help start that healing process. This one, we've got some special concern. This is a plant that you'll find, especially in, a lot of these too in the, sort of Appalachian region, they get poached a lot. So it's not just habitat loss, it's actually being, plants being poached from the wild for sale, because golden seal has a pretty high resale value. If you've ever gone to buy some golden seal powder online, 4 ounces is well over $100. So you can see why people would, go out and poach it from the wild. It's got a good retail value, but better yet, how about we all just start growing it so we have enough to share and go around and use when we need it. And then here are, just so you can see too, these are the berries. See this red cluster of berries? They generally, each plant will they have 1 flower, maybe 2, and then they'll get these clusters of berries. Each of those berries has about 30 teeny tiny little black seeds in there. I generally, again, just take them fresh and I plop them in the ground in various places and just wait for them to bloom, if they will. I do tend to, when I'm doing this whole planting fresh berries process, I do tend to leave a few for the creatures who would normally be feeding on them too, because I want to encourage that wildlife to know, hey, this is a habitat where you can come and you will find food and you'll find the resources you need. And then from here, I'm going to just quickly go over a couple of additional plants. I'm not giving you a whole bunch of information, but these are a couple of additional plants that have been used medicinally. And these are plants that I generally don't use for medicine because they tend to be a little more on the potent side, or they're highly endangered. So I don't even want to dig them up. but if you can grow them in your gardens, in your woodlands, that would be wonderful. So this is Bloodroot, and this is one that regularly is at the West Newbury Plant and Garden Sale, which if you haven't been to the West Newbury Plant and Garden Sale, it's amazing. So the Bloodroot, this is Sanguinaria canadensis. It's a beautiful ephemeral. It's one of the earliest plants to come up in the spring. The bees love it. The foliage is just gorgeous. I'm trying to remember if I put another picture on there. No, I don't have it. When it comes up, it doesn't even, you can't even imagine that it's going to open up into this beautiful flower, and the blooms only last for a couple of days. So if you see it blooming, go out and take your pictures because they might not be there the next day. The next one, this is, and pardon my dirty fingers, this is just a close-up of the flowers. This is blue cohosh, Colophyllum thalictroides. This one is threatened in Rhode Island, but I'm glad to see that was the extent of it. This is another beautiful woodland plant, and this is more of a deep woodland plant, and it does prefer some moisture. It doesn't want its roots wet, so I wouldn't plant it down near your wetlands, but it does like some moisture. So these, woody, wet areas that we have around here, it seems to be really thriving. And this is one that I'm slowly but surely just kind of going out into my woods and just putting it in quiet places where I'm not even going to disturb it, with hopes that maybe in 10 years it'll have a halfway decent stand of flowers. This plant grows really slowly. This is probably one of the slower growing plants that I have in my garden. I had this one here. It gets to about 3 feet tall, but the flowers are just minuscule. And then they turn into these pretty blue berries. But it's self-seeded. It's self-seeded, and I had a plant come up, and it was probably 3 inches tall for like 2 years. So I don't know what's going to happen this next year, but this is a really slow growing, slow spreading plant. It could also be happier in a different location in my garden, so that could also be a possibility. And then of course Trillium, any of the Trillium species. These are pretty much all endangered in multiple locations and across a variety of species. So this is one, be really mindful of where you are getting your Trillium species from. They are very difficult to cultivate, at least in my experience. So if you know of a good source, please send it along. And if you have a reputable source for getting cultivated Trillium or Trillium seeds, that is a great place to start. Do not buy wild plants, please. And then, of course, our little lady slippers, the Cypripedium species. I think we all know that this beautiful little plant is endangered and threatened in most places. And if you look at the historical uses of this, actually lady slipper and Trillium, but lady slipper in particular, it is a spectacular nervous system herb for anxiety, stress, tension, all of those things that give you that make you feel anxious and tight. Lady slipper is a phenomenal herb for that. I have not used the herb because of the endangered element of it. I have used it in a homeopathic remedy, which is a little bit different and than an herbal remedy. That's another class, but it is really remarkable. And so that is essentially the extent of it. I'm trying to go through and not keep you too long. So here's some further reading. So support your libraries, borrow books. A lot of the books that I'm listing here, I have gotten through the West Newbury Library, and they can do the interlibrary loan. And I can't see me, so I'm hoping you can see me, but I'll just go through. I have some of the titles right here, so I'll show you the covers too, because I think that's fun. So this is the first one, The Organic Medicinal Herb Farmer by Jeff and Melanie Carpenter. Great book. It's got medicinal information. It's got all sorts of wonderful stuff. Growing at Risk Medicinal Herbs by Rico Check. Wealth of information. This one for Homegrown Herbs by Tammy Hartung. Really fun for everyone from medicinal gardeners to ornamental gardeners. Planting the Future by Rosemary Gladstar and Pamela Hirsch. This is also United Plant Savers supported. And I have How to Move Like a Gardener by Deb Sewell. If you ever have the opportunity to go up to, I think she's in Rockland, Maine, Avena Botanicals. If you want to see some spectacular gardens, wow, it's amazing what she's done. And I don't have the cover of Wildflowers of New England by Ted Elliman and Native Plant Trust, but you should have that on your bookshelves. And then some of the online resources I was talking about. So United Plant Savers, this is all sorts of information about the ecological status of these native medicinal plants. You can become a member, and they have annual seed sales. So you can buy ginseng seeds, ramp seeds, golden seal rootlets. It's been a really great resource for me. Zach Wood's Herb Farm, that's also Jeff and Melanie Carpenter. This is their herb farm. They do offer wonderful herbs. They're a little pricey, but the quality is worth every penny. But they also offer live plants. So if you're interested, I don't know if their live plants have closed out for this season, but that's also another great resource. I get a huge amount of plant material from Fedco Seeds, and my seeds for my garden. They have wonderful trees, shrubs, herbs, roots. Really, it's a great resource. And then Prairie Moon, I haven't actually used Prairie Moon, but I've heard so many great things from other people that I thought I would include it because they're another great resource for native medicinals. And then locally, if you're interested, the Monarch Gardener, Katie Hone, she is Beverly Hamilton. She's in the area, but she is a wealth of resources for monarch butterfly gardening. She also sells amazing native local plants. So not just medicinals, but everything she sells is native. So I highly recommend checking her out. She's fantastic. And that is that. So I'm gonna stop my share and go back. All right.
Wow.
Good. Sorry. Yeah. Are you
Hannah,
exploded yet?
just incredible. I mean, to hear some of the medicinal uses of these incredible plants, from Echinacea to butterfly weed and on. And then I had to write down as quickly as I could just that information, but galactagogue,
Mm-hmm.
hepatic, these words. So what an informative lecture. So we have some questions for you.
Yeah.
And just to remind everyone that we indeed, if you came out a little late, this is being recorded. And probably within the next week or so, we'll have it up on our West Newbury Wild and Native website, www.wnwildnative.org. And then I'll also get the listings of the books and the places you recommended. We'll get that on our website for everyone to be able to have also. So again, fabulous information. And this was really fun. So yeah, keep putting your questions in. Here's a question. For the Echinacea, are you using the flower or the root?
I use the whole plant. I use all parts. I might not use the stems, but you can use the whole plant. You will find that the root has more of those analgesic, more of those immune supporting elements. And the root I prefer for if you need that numbing effect if you've got an oral infection. But I typically, when I use my Echinacea, I'm actually making a blend of typically root and aerial parts, meaning leaves and flowers, because I usually leave a bunch of the seeds for the birds. I should harvest them for my own use, but I've got enough in the root and leaf. The birds can have the seeds.
Nice. Question from Chris. How do you take these herbs internally?
Sure.
Do you make a tonic? Do you ground to powder?
Sure. So there are so many ways to use herbs. The easiest is to incorporate them in your foods, put them in, if you have nice fresh powders, not fresh herb, but dried herbs that are powdered that aren't old. Okay. Your powders, use them up, store them properly, use them within about 6 months. But you can just add those to foods, soups, stews, stocks. Typically, though, you would find that herbs are going to be used in teas, in some sort of water preparation. Historically, actually, a lot of these herbs were used in making beer because water wasn't necessarily something that was very potable. So they would ferment it or make beers, or they would infuse them in vinegars. using vinegar as a menstruum. Here's another good vocabulary word. So a menstruum is essentially just what you're soaking your herbs in, whether it be water, oil, vinegar. They would actually, if any of you foodies who are interested in trying something fun, you can make what's called a shrub. So you combine your herbs and some fresh fruits, like maybe some raspberries, soak it in vinegar for a couple of weeks, strain it out, and then mix it with some sugar syrup, some simple syrup, and it makes like a sweet and sour beverage. You can then pour it in with some seltzer water or something like that. Yeah.
Wow, thank you. Somebody else said they do a lot of research when they forage before using the plants or herbs. Some wonderful comments, just a fascinating program. Thank you so much for this wonderful presentation.
Sure.
Any other questions out there? Get them in now. And I think that may wrap it up. I don't see any new ones coming in.
Sure. Yeah. And